Feel the fear and do it anyway. Have you heard that phrase? Or seen it in a planner or on an inspirational poster or a workshop presentation? In the world of self-help, it comes up a lot, with good reason. Fear is a natural part of our lives, but when it gets in the way of living, of pursuing our dreams, that's when we need to make a change. Fear is a powerful paralyzer that needn't be. It's time to change how we see it and learn to work with it, not against it. Today's episode covers how to do that. You're listening to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zawrotny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping clients make space for what matters most in their lives. Join me each episode and we'll talk about decluttering, stress management, habits, personalized productivity, gratitude, and so much more. I understand the overwhelm of life because I'm a wife, mom to kids and cats, and a former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Fear seems like a pretty straightforward term, right? It's defined as an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. While that's accurate and natural, after all, we're hardwired to find dangers so we can protect ourselves and stay safe. It's when this emotion takes over and keeps you from living life that it becomes a problem. Today, I welcome Raven Waterman to the Positively Living podcast to talk about how we can feel the fear, yet still take action. Raven is a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist, certified life coach, and certified executive coach. For over 20 years, Raven has led teams and developed and implemented trainings designed to promote skill acquisition and enhance professional performance. As the owner and operator of Raven's Wings LLC, she is committed to her mission of supporting professional women in taking the lead in their lives and shifting their mindset in order to achieve their goals. She and I connected over a similar mission to encourage women to take action. And as we have both seen in our coaching, fear can be debilitating. Fear, which manifests itself in many ways, seems to come up most for professional women and men as self-doubt. Doubt causes indecision, inaction, and worry, all ingredients for what we perceive as failure. It's important to understand that fear is not all bad. After all, it gives us a healthy respect for what we're doing, and it's our brain's way of protecting us. But when it blocks us from moving forward, making us play passive in our own lives, we are giving it unnecessary power. In our conversation today, Raven describes the internal dialogue to listen for when fear is paralyzing and suggests the kind of support we need to get it under control. While I am all for introspection and self-awareness, fear is an instance where searching for outward support may be necessary. Fear can often be contrary to reality, so it's important to check it through a varied support network. Keep in mind friends, mentors, therapists, and coaches all work differently and support different aspects of your life, and understand and perceive your challenges differently too. But in combination, they can provide extremely effective support. Be sure to listen for Raven's descriptions of fear and the different responses as they relate to therapy versus coaching. It's extremely helpful to assess where you are on your path and the type of help that will suit you best. You'll see some overlap in the coach and counselor comparison in episode 29 on trauma with Mallory Jackson, which I highly recommend as a companion episode to this one. Raven and I end our chat on a fun note in more ways than one. Not only does Raven offer a quintessential dance song from one of the best dancers of all time, in my opinion, she also encourages us to focus on the excitement and joy of what we're doing as an antidote to fear. Be sure to listen for that part of the conversation. It is filled with hope, and it is my favorite part. As you listen to our conversation, remember this: fear is normal. We all have it. We are not alone in this. The key is to manage it and feel it, not feed it. Welcome, Raven Waterman, to the Positively Living podcast. You and I connected over a similar mission to lift other women up and encourage them to make choices that fulfill them and to take action on those choices. And I'm so delighted to talk to you today about how we can encourage them to move past fear and to do just that. I would love if you would tell us a bit about who you are and who you help and what makes you light up.
Well, first of all, thank you, Lisa, for having me on. I'm like I was saying, I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation. I'm Raven Waterman. I'm a therapist and executive leadership coach here in New York City. So I've been doing clinical social work for over 20 years, and worked in a range of different organizations. And then in February of 2019, I decided that I really wanted to get back to doing more individual work. I really wanted to focus on working with women, specifically around both their mental health needs, but then also their leadership development. So I launched Raven's Wings LLC, and I sort of have just been going since then. And I think what really inspires me and lights me up is that opportunity to partner and join with other women on their journey, and to just be able to be support to them in that, an accountability partner in that, and just to see sort of like the transformations that can happen through those processes.
With coaching support, with collaboration, I've seen it as well. And it's just so incredibly powerful. Our conversation today is an example of that. When we bring our minds and our hearts together. And what I especially appreciate about what you do is that connection, that juxtaposition of mental health and leadership, and understanding that connection. I think when we do, and we can honor it, and we can find ways to keep our mental health healthy, you know what I mean? Like when
Right.
we can, when we can take care of that side of us and really acknowledge it and honor it, it helps us become better leaders. And I remember when you and I were chatting, you talking about being a leader in our own lives. And I loved that philosophy, and being able to bring those concepts together. Let's start at the beginning, since we're talking today about the classic feel the fear and do it anyway. Let's talk a bit about what fear is. And also, I'd love to know if you have a story yourself of overcoming, working through it.
Sure. Fear is, I mean, it takes so many different forms, but I'll talk about a couple of common ones that I see.
Mm-hmm.
I see often self-doubts, and this is true even regardless of a person's accomplishments in life, the sort of inner dialogue of, can I really do this? Am I capable of doing this? Whatever the this is, right? So those kinds of limiting beliefs, worries about, really being able to produce at a particular level or way that they think maybe other people are expecting of them. And I don't think fear is a bad thing. I think, and that's why we're having this conversation, because, sometimes fear can help to kind of keep us safe, right? It allows us to sort of think things through a little bit and make less just sort of impulsive decisions. But the other side of that is when it just becomes pervasive in your life and it's really holding you back from doing the things that you would like to do. I'll give you an example of that. So for myself, I was, when I started my business, I was actually still working full time. And that was coming to an end, which I was really prepared for. And I sort of was at a crossroads of, what do I want to do? Do I want to now really, work my business full time, or do I want to go back into, an organization and maybe do, my work that I wanted to do sort of part time? And there were a lot of fears around that, fears of, I don't want to let my family down in terms of, and the financial responsibilities and things. And I was faced with this really big decision and had to confront some of my own beliefs about my ability to make this a successful, endeavor. And so that for me, I mean, that wasn't certainly the only time I've experienced it, but I really had to do a lot of introspection and move through that. And I'm so thankful, that I did, but it wasn't easy.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point too, that it's not the only time that you've experienced this. And I like what you said about it not being a bad thing. I agree. Fear, it's intended to keep us safe, right? And it's intended to give us, I think, sometimes a healthy respect for whatever it is that we're doing.
Mhm.
We show up sharper, right? It's sort of it's a good stress response when it's isolated and specific and containable, if you will. But when it goes so far that it keeps us from doing anything, when it paralyzes us, right?
Yeah,
That's
definitely. I think when it also is contrary to a lot of the reality of the situation. So when you are, faced with, okay, maybe going after that promotion, or and you've had so many other successes that you've earned, you've worked for, and yet you're still like, oh, I don't know, I don't think I can do that, right? It's so contrary to what is the reality, or it's paralyzing, and it's not allowing you to move in one direction or another, and you're sort of just like, well, I'll let whatever happens. That can really be a fear response, where I'm not going to just sort of take charge of the direction. I'm just going to let it play out, and then say, well, whatever was meant to be was meant to be, right?
right, because then that's a safety mechanism, because if you let it play out and whatever's meant to be happens, then you didn't set yourself up for what you consider failure or what you consider rejection. And of course, this immediately makes me think of the phrase that flies around, at least in the coaching world I live in, imposter syndrome, right? And so repeat experiences. What you were saying is this can happen again and again, and even at a level where you've achieved so much. I can't think of the exact actor at the moment, but I know that I've read stuff about, people that you've seen who've accomplished so much, still feeling that.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can look at them and go, really? But I also look at it like, well, if they can feel it, it's no wonder I feel it too.
Right, right. And I think that's a great thing to remind yourself of. Like, you have people who are walking on right now national stages, have huge platforms, and they are probably experiencing some of the very same doubts and fears and concerns. The other thing is the fear of actually succeeding. That's a that's a tricky one. What would it mean if I actually succeeded at this? If I put myself out and then this thing actually, I got it, and now I've got to show up and I've got to do it. And I think that's another theme that can come up too, that you might be successful, which can be scary.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, that's such a great point. I feel like it might be Marianne Williamson who has a quote about that. I'll look it up and put it in the show notes. But it's this idea that, yeah, what we don't always fear is failure, but sometimes success. So that's interesting. Let's unpack that a little bit, because I know in my life, I've felt this in some ways where, and I've actually seen it in my clients too, where when you're kind of envisioning what something might be and you're extrapolating a bit, and sometimes you take it really far, and that kind of goes back to what you're saying about being contrary to reality, that it's, if I succeed, then I'm going to have to do all this work, and I'm going to have to do stuff that I don't like to do. And you're taking it further and thinking that success will equal these things that you actually don't want, even though you want success, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's if I succeed, I may have to now do some things that I'm not actually comfortable with doing. And if I succeed and people really take me up on this, or I get this new promotion, or then I'm going to have to show up every day and do this. And do I want that? Do I want that responsibility? Am I able to really handle all that? So it's so complex, which I think is also important to, because sometimes we can make it seem like it's such an insignificant thing. Oh, you're just afraid, just get over it and do it. And in reality, it's very complex, and it's so rooted in a lot of our own experiences in life, and the messages that we've received, throughout our life.
So it sounds like when we're talking about fear, it's important to be able to distinguish the different kinds that are happening, and to be able to figure out what's rooted in reality, what is the part that's going to give us that honest respect for what's going on, and the other part that's essentially lying to us, if you will. So what do we do with that? What are we looking for? I like how you gave us the description of how fear could manifest itself as self-doubt, things like that. What other signs are we looking for, and where can we take that? What can we do with it?
I think you're looking for that internal dialogue. Listen to what you're saying inside of your own head, that you probably aren't saying out loud to other people. Start by looking at that dialogue without judging it. Like, this is really happening. I'm really struggling with this. And what is that conversation that you're having in your head? I think that this is a wonderful opportunity to work with somebody through that. Being introspective is fantastic, but it can also be really hard to be objective with ourselves. So this is a good opportunity to seek out some additional constructive support, like to make sure that's clear, and talk through some of that. And it could mean being vulnerable, but saying, this is the maybe the choice that I'm faced with, or something that I'm considering, and I'm finding myself having these sort of like conflicting thoughts or dialogue in my own head, or I'm finding that I've been talking about wanting to accomplish this goal for so long and I'm not moving forward, and really using that as an opportunity to unpack it, because that will allow you to figure out what is the root of it and what do you want to do to work through it.
Yeah, that's so good. And what's inspiring me as you describe this is how so often I think we as coaches do encourage someone to look internally and understand. And that's the first step. But
Mhm.
your point about the fact that being introspective is important, but that in a case like this with fear, you may have this internal dialogue that's going on where you do need to go outward to kind of balance it out, to have sort of checks and balances, really,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So support. I mean, coaching would be an obvious one.
Mhm.
Other kinds of support groups or friends, maybe, or family.
Having a professional network can be really helpful.
Hmm.
Certainly, informal mentorship can be really helpful. Absolutely, coaching can be really helpful. And understanding that all of these different types of support will work for you in different ways. They are very different things. But I think that, particularly if we're talking about, building up yourself in terms of like your professional development and growth, or some of those areas in your life, that you really almost want to have as many different types of constructive supports as you can, and not feel like, well, I've got this mentor that I sort of work with. That's wonderful, but that could be one source. Developing networks around what your particular either special interests are or your goals are can be another type, right? And there's no reason that one has to be exclusive of the other. The one thing that I think is so valuable about coaching is that that's really a very subjective process. You're working with somebody who is there to focus on what you're trying to achieve subjectively. And they are motivated to see you succeed, but you are leading that process. It's formal and you know what to expect, which I think can be really helpful too.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It may be self-serving, but I have seen it. I mean, I've been coached and I do
Mhm.
coach. But given that idea, I think it's such an important point that you make, that each of these different kinds of supports will have a different goal in mind for you, or a different perspective, if you will. So, for example, you can look to support systems from a personal level, but your family has a different viewpoint of what you're going through. They don't necessarily understand, especially if you're dealing with professional issues, where they're not in that same environment, or, the same thing for entrepreneurs, right? Where if you don't necessarily understand what you're going through as an entrepreneur, in other words, they can support you to a certain extent. And
Right.
the other thing I'm thinking of is the balance of, having therapy as well as coaching, and how wonderfully they go together. And I have many, many clients who do both. And again, because the modalities are different, And so it creates a well-rounded support system, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. One thing that I see a lot is people commenting like, "Well, my family doesn't support me, my friends don't support me," and I think part of it is that, and you sort of touched on it, but that they may not know how, they may not know what you need, they may not have the skill set that you need
Yeah.
to support you in the way that would really be meaningful in that moment. So I love that idea of the well-rounded support, and I see so many people disappointed by the fact that, oh, but I thought that my friend and my family would show up. And I think in that type of relationship, what you're looking for is, when you're dealing with a core or a key issue, that really needs to be front and center. That needs to be the focus of, the conversations that you're having. But with your friends and your family, they're not subjective, right? Or I should say objective,
Yes.
right? And they
Yes.
may have, competing needs that they want to talk about. So it's just a whole different type of, dynamic that is can sometimes leave you, unfortunately, feeling like, oh, I'm not support. They don't get it. I'm not supported. And they may just not know how or be able to focus on what your need is.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And I see this so many times where something isn't quite meshing, and it's not that what they're doing or not doing is intentional in the way that you're feeling it or
Mhm.
experiencing it, but you're right that they don't have the tools or they don't have the perspective. I've seen many cases when I work with entrepreneurs where they have family that struggles because their lives were all employment based,
Mhm.
and
Right.
they don't understand, or maybe they don't feel comfortable with the risk that's involved in being an entrepreneur, and so they struggle. They may want them to succeed, but sometimes their feeling is they have their own fear that they're dealing with. So everyone who's, going to be interacting with you will have their own fear that they're dealing with,
Mhm.
and they'll bring that perspective to the table. So I think that's such a good point. All right, so we have how fear can show up, this self-doubt and wondering in this internal dialogue. So the first is being aware and
Mhm.
seeing that dialogue, and then it's like, okay, now let me check it with different kinds of support systems. And I think, yeah, the idea of going for multiple conversations. And by the way, it will get easier. Good point, Raven, about how it can feel very vulnerable when
Mhm.
you take that expression of whatever self-doubt that you have and you share it openly. You actually say what's been, because, and it can, oh my gosh, when it goes through your mind,
Mhm.
boy, when you keep it to yourself, doesn't it love to grow by
Oh, it
leaps and
does.
bounds?
It does. It just implants itself and just and it like just like infiltrates all of your sort of your thoughts, and it does. It definitely magnifies itself, and it almost can become like this very loud sort of crescendo that you can't hear anything else because all you can hear is, you can't do that. You're not. That's not going to work. Why would you? Right? Like that's all that you can hear,
Mhm.
and it can really drown out some of the hopefulness, and the excitement too. Like there isn't anything wrong with being excited about something new possibly happening.
Yeah, and to explore the possibilities, and sometimes we shut ourselves down before we even start by that. So as much as it can also be fearful to be vulnerable, it's interesting how when you speak these things out loud, you can take away some of that power and really gain clarity, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then I think, especially if you're using external supports, and like you said, those checks and balances, you stop being isolated with it,
Yeah.
you know and it helps you to get some perspective on it. What parts of this are maybe based in some realities, which just might need some additional work to do, and
Hmm.
what parts of these are based in unfounded kind of ideas or beliefs that have just taken root, and are sort of cutting you off before you even take a chance or get started.
Right. And I, always love to bring things back to this idea of decluttering and clearing out and making space. And what you're essentially describing is saying whatever's coming in, that input, that we're feeling, that fear that we're feeling, work with people who can support you to figure out what the pieces are and what you can release and let go of,
Yes, yes,
right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That's fantastic. Okay. So I mentioned before how I appreciated the mental health side of what you do. And so I think I touched upon that a little bit with the idea of therapy. And if there's any advice that you can offer in terms of what signs we need to look for to kind of see which pieces are happening with this fear, like what internal dialogue we might be seeing in one direction where we might need more support on the therapy side versus the coaching side. Can you
Mhm.
speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So if you are experiencing other symptoms, right? So this you're finding that emotionally you're feeling overwhelmed, flooded, really struggling with managing, just getting through day to day, some of the things that you need to accomplish. And I mean, even sometimes basic things like taking care of your house or getting yourself kind of motivated, or you may be showing up and doing all the things, but really sort of just on autopilot, not feeling grounded and connected. Maybe, revisiting experiences that you've had so vividly that it's almost like you're right back there again, right? Past experiences that maybe were difficult or upsetting or unresolved. Those are all issues that you can be exploring with a therapist and working through. So you may start out about with what's currently going on. For example, lots of people have been struggling with just through the pandemic and all the changes that that's brought about in people's lives, right? And so you may come in because that's sort of the immediate thing that's happening right now. And as you're delving into that, recognize that it's rooted in experiences that you've had previously in your life, and you working through that. Whereas coaching is really typically present focused. We're working on a targeted issue, and you are looking at goals that you want to achieve, and you're looking for support and accountability and action planning around those goals. And that doesn't mean that conversation around fears, both of those spaces will surface, but with coaching it's really going to be more observational.
Mhm.
And okay, and now let's still be looking at a plan and action steps that you can take to move yourself forward.
Good, exactly. Because again, the modalities are different, and it's that idea that depending upon what's coming up for you and how it's challenging you to live your life, there are certain kinds of support that match up better. That really helps. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
So I think a great place to kind of wrap things up in terms of where we can take steps after we've listened to this conversation. And I love the way that you described, leading in our own lives. And I think, again, this applies to women in business, women owning business, professional women in whatever capacity. What steps do we take today when we walk away from here? What would you recommend that we do to manage the fears better and to take steps toward these goals, these dreams, these ideas that we have?
One, normalize the experience of being fearful. Normalize that. Normalize the experience of being unsure, and be open to beginning to explore what is possible to support you through that. So I think recognizing that you may be having this experience, that you're not the only one who's gone through this or who will go through this,
Yes.
then recognizing, but it can be different, and that you can do great things, wonderful things, even while feeling afraid. And you don't have to do those things alone. You don't have to be just bearing it and getting through it, right? I think sometimes we can wear that almost like a badge of honor, like, oh, I'm just, I'm still pushing through. And in reality, it doesn't always have to be that hard. There are ways to alleviate whatever's distressing or stressful or creating that sense of fear, that you may be able to actually alleviate some of that and find enjoyment in the things that you're doing. Like it's actually possible to be enjoying wherever it is that you're standing right now, and use some of that to get to the next place that you want to be.
Excellent. Yeah. So the first and foremost is this idea of being curious. And this is a topic that comes up a lot on the Positively Living podcast, because when we are curious, we take away the judgment.
Mhm.
We're simply wondering what's going on. We're exploring it. We're seeing how it is. And then the next is remembering you're not alone. Right. We are in this together. Raven and I both raising both our hands. We've been through the fear. But what I love the most about what you said, and this is the reminder, this is where all the quotes come from, the feel the fear and do it anyway, is that so often we do take action through fear, with fear. I mean, it's side by side. And that's how it's supposed to be. I mean, it's how it is. It is something to normalize that we feel this. So it's a matter of processing it, filtering it, and figuring out how to manage it for us and what we want to do, right?
Yes, absolutely. 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 Yeah.
Love that. Is
Mhm.
there anything else that you want to share about this topic that I may not have thought to ask, or that's coming up for you right now?
I just think that excitement piece,
Hmm.
and this is, I'll say, even for myself, in we can get so focused on, okay, I want to achieve this, whatever the thing is that I'm trying to achieve, the goal or the goals. And, and we sort of organize what eventually what that will look like. And now we're just doing it. But I want to encourage people to really take a minute to enjoy it. Take a minute to ground yourself in where you are standing, and like connect with being excited, connect with having a little bit of fun with it. I feel like that gets lost sometimes and things can get so heavy.
Hmm.
So as much as, fear is something to keep working through, connecting to excitement and joy can be important too.
And I think it's an incredible tool to help you work through it, because I mean, we know this with habit development, that the more fun and enjoyment you have, the more telling it will be that you will continue. Kind of
Mhm.
obvious, right?
Mhm.
But the more that we enjoy something, the more that we connect to that fun, the more we'll want to repeat it. And I think in this case, it can help distract us from the fear or the uncertainty, because we're placing our focus into the positive. And that was something that I felt inspired by what you were describing today, is this idea of how we need to focus on what we want, and not necessarily. So if we don't focus on the fear so much, we have to manage it, we have to acknowledge it, normalize it, honor it, work through it, get the support around it. But then we focus on what we're loving about what we're dreaming about, what we're wanting. And I think when we do that, first of all, that's how we create things best. And second of all, that's how we're going to really experience it fully, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
love
Yeah.
that. So, and speaking of fun, I think now's the time to wrap things up with some fun. And let's start with filling in the blank of the song that always makes me dance is.
Tina Turner's Proud Mary.
Oh,
Love
that's a
that song.
good one. She's amazing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, and how about the quote or mantra I share most often is.
You can't pour from an empty cup. I think that just speaks volumes, just volumes. So yeah, definitely that one.
I love that. That is my one of my favorite self-care sayings. And by
Mhm.
the way, just a little added bonus tip here. If you have an empty cup, if you haven't been really pushing the self-care, that's when fear is going to show up the most,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think. So
Mhm. Yep.
wonderful. And how about a book, app, or resource that makes my life easier is?
So I anything that organizes all your passwords. One that I use is LastPass.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely for for us business owners, content creators. You use million and one tools, and having something that keeps all of your passwords in a secure place, definitely necessary.
That's a great suggestion. And by the way, this is especially good if you decide you want to collaborate and delegate with anyone, because then that's a nice, safe, and secure way to be able to share and have them access different platforms without you, tossing passwords around that you can't necessarily remember. So
Right, right.
good. All right. And last but definitely not least, what or whom are you grateful for today, Raven?
I'm grateful for conversations like this. I love the opportunity to be able to just sit down and kind of talk about how this experience, both from a personal perspective, but from the perspective of women that I've worked with. And just knowing that it might and hopefully will continue to inspire other women to kind of get on their own journeys and move forward. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity.
As am I. I'm so grateful for you today and having this conversation, because we're all about inspiring. And I know the listeners will want to learn more about you and get in touch with you. Tell us where we can find you.
Okay. So you can visit my website, ravenswingsllc.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn at Raven Waterman, or on Instagram and Facebook at Ravens Wings LLC.
Great. And I will make sure to have all of your links in the show notes. Thank you, Raven. Thank you for shining your light in this world and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you.
Of all the liars in the world, sometimes the worst are our own fears. Rudyard Kipling. Thank you for joining me on the Positively Living podcast. Your time is precious, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. Would you like to further explore the topics you've heard and implement what inspires you? Could you use some coaching support? What if you could attend a private Q&A with my guests and access bonus content? You can do all that and more in the Positively Living membership community. Check the link in the show notes or head to positivelyproductive.com/membership to enroll. I look forward to having you join me next episode and in the community. Until then, keep it positive and keep making space for what matters most.